Hello and welcome to the first module of AZ-700 where we're going to discuss about Azure Virtual Networks. Now, the very first question arises before getting into the module that we all are aware about networks. So, how Azure Virtual Networks helps me and my organization? Well, as we all know that the basic principle behind any network is to connect various different services, various different devices. Now with Azure Virtual Networks, you don't have to manage any servers and all as we all are aware of that. And also there is no pricing. That means if you wanted to create a new Azure Virtual Network, you will not have to pay anything especially for creating that network. So if we ask about that how Azure Virtual Network can actually help me and my organization. So for this, let me give you a very simple example. Like you are an organization and you wanted to connect your distributed workloads. That means you have your workloads around the globe. You also have workloads in USA region, you also have workloads in India, and as an organization you want your users to connect to some of the services while you don't want some of the services to be publicly accessible like your databases. So for this you can within the Azure cloud you can select any of the region. You can create a virtual network in this region, and in that virtual network you can make different parts of that virtual network, which is known as subnets. And with this you can make sure that the internet or any of the user is only able to connect to the services which you wanted. So we're going to explore that how, as we move ahead we will explore that how Azure virtual networks can help you achieve all that. So where this is going to be a little bit long module because we want to cover about, we will cover in T shape. That means we're going to cover broadly about the various services which is being associated with Azure virtual networks, but we are only will discussing in brief. We'll not deep diving into any of the services because they are so vast. So firstly coming into that, what is Azure virtual networks? So for many organizations, those who are migrating themselves to the cloud, they want the freedom that they have in their on-premises network. The freedom in the sense they wanted to specify that which IP addresses they want their machines to have. So you can do that by using Azure Virtual Networks. With Azure Virtual Network, you have to firstly specify your IP address space. Then you specify that okay, this is the IP address which conforms to RFC 1918. 1918 is RFC is a rule which specifies the private IP addresses. You can also specify some public IP addresses, but organizations prefer to specify private IP addresses like this or like this 192.168.0.0 slash 1624, whatever size you want. And we know for a quick revision that by having a slash 16, by having a slash 16 size, we all know that a slash 16 size will give you the IP addresses around, you will get around 65,000 IP addresses, which is 2 raised to the power 16. So these many IP addresses you will get. So in virtual network you have to specify, the very first step is to you have to specify your address range, that okay, what address you want. Now if you ask me that why I need to specify address range, why don't Azure give me any address space that automatically? So one of the rationale behind the customers being able to define their address space is to so that they can connect to various other networks as well, so that you can connect to either your on-premises networks, either to other virtual networks, or even to other cloud services. We're gonna see how this all happens. Because if the range is same for your virtual network on Azure and and your on-premises have the same address range, then you'll not be able to connect to them. And also it helps you distinguish that, okay, if the address range is 10.0.0, then it is my Azure virtual network, or if the address space is something other, then it may be my on-premises network. So firstly you have to specify the address range, keeping in mind that what you want with that virtual network to do. If you want that particular virtual network, like in this example, if you want that particular virtual network which is residing in a region to be client facing, that means it will be talking to the internet and hence to your end users. Then keeping that requirement in mind, you can partition your virtual network. Like for example, if this is my virtual network having some particular address space, which is a CIDR classless interdomain routing address space, then you can partition that address space. That means using that address space, you can specify some parts. That means if it is having 65,000 IP addresses, I can take almost you can say 1000 IP addresses or 251 IP addresses. And with the use of those IP addresses, I can specify some subnets. Now a subnet, as we all know, that a subnet is a part of a virtual network. A subnet's virtual, what we can say, a subnet's um, address space is being created by a virtual network address space. So as you see that this 10.0.0/16, which will be having 65,000 address spaces, out of this huge address space we have created a subnet, and in that subnet we attached some security rules so that the customers can only connect to this subnet, not the other one, which will be having any different address space. So by this we make sure that the customers are able to connect to the services which we want them to connect to, not the other way around. Not only this, the virtual network can also help you to connect to your on-premises network. Like for this example, this is a particular virtual network which is residing in any other particular region of Azure, maybe central India in this particular example. Then you can connect your on-premises data center with various options available. Either you can use an express route for this so that you can have your own cables laid down between the Azure colocation facility and your on-premises data center, which will have its own unique benefits like fast network speed, high bandwidth, reliable connection. Now, if you want um, the traffic to be sent from your on-premises data center, the data to be flowing from your on-premises data center to the Azure virtual network through an encrypted tunnel, through a VPN, then you can also configure a VPN with that. So in a nutshell, Azure Virtual Networks helps you to connect to various services. Those services may be internet, maybe it makes the communication between Azure resources possible. It can also connect to various other services like your on-premises, like to other cloud networks through a VPN gateway. You can filter the network traffic with the use of network security groups, and you can route the traffic that you want in a way you wanted. Like for this simple example, if your services are connected to the internet, you have a load balancer, so that if 30,000 requests are coming, then then not all 30,000 requests is being handled by a single virtual machine. You distributed the load equally, 10,000 each with a virtual machine, so that none of the virtual machine is either underperforming or none of the virtual machine is overperforming. And you may also have an internal load balancer, as we saw, and we have covered all of these things in Azure Administrator module as well. So a virtual network helps you in various different manners, right? So before coming to this slide, um, let me go in the portal and show you that how can you create a virtual network. So you can go to portal.azure.com. Once you are in the portal.azure.com, you can either search for Azure Virtual Network, or you can go to all services and then to Azure Virtual Networks. Now, please note that the creation of Azure Virtual Network is totally free, but the resources that you wanted to create inside the virtual network will be costing you money, because ultimately the aim of creating a virtual network is to create various services inside that virtual network. I'm gonna name it AZ-700. Now, every virtual network is attached to a particular region. So, by specifying a region of the virtual network, one thing that you have to note here is that if you wanted to create any services like your virtual machine, like your database or something like that, now all of these services are attached to a particular region. We are already aware of that. By specifying the virtual network in a particular region, like if I say I wanted to create this in Japan East, then whenever all the services that I wanted to create in Japan East will be showing this virtual network. Otherwise, this virtual network will not be able to see that. I'm gonna clear this topic once we started creation of other services. Now you can specify up to 5 address spaces in your virtual network. Like your virtual network can also have an address space like this: 10.0.0.0/16. You can also have another address space like this: 192.168.0.0/maybe 24. Now, while you are specifying your address space, there are something to note. So there are some non-routable address spaces as well. Like for example, the we all know the local host IP addresses, or we can also say the loopback IP address, which is 127.0.0.0/8. So this address space is not allowed, as you can see, right? So this is a not, we can say, unavailable address space. Like if you want to specify any other address space like 8.0. Oops, 8.0. I think I put two dots over here. 8.0.0.0/16. So you can if this type of IP address is not specified under RFC 1918, which is RFC 1918 is a rule which specifies the private or non-routable address spaces. So except some unavailable IP addresses like which is used for multicast, broadcast, your loopback, link local, or internal DNS services which is used by Azure, these address spaces are not available for you to create a virtual network. While you can use any other services to create a virtual network, right? Now you can also create the subnets for virtual network. So while creation of a subnet, like you can create a subnet as per your own needs. As you see, that subnet is a particular partition of our virtual network. So before coming into subnets, let me discuss about the address space of virtual machine. So in every address space, as we know, that you get a certain number of IP addresses, and in those IP addresses, certain IP addresses are reserved by Azure, which is if you specify, like for our example, we specified the IP address of 10.0.0/16. So within that IP address, the first IP, which is 10.0.0.0, will be reserved by Azure as an what we can say, the network address, and another one are reserved for the default gateway and the DNS servers of Azure, and the last one is for your broadcast address. Now it need not to be always 255. Like for example, if you specify an address space for your virtual network to be maybe 10.0.0 um, dot 0, right? So last address space is always what we can say, is always reserved by Azure, right? So now the benefit of you got after specifying your virtual network, it is your own representation. It is under your hands. Like what services you wanted to create your Azure virtual network, which services you wanted to communicate with each other using Azure virtual network. Like all the services which are residing in our Azure virtual network will be able to communicate to themselves without specifying any extra routes, without putting in any extra effort. Like if you have a virtual machine and a database created within an Azure virtual network, then they both will be able to communicate to each other without any extra configurations needed. While if you have virtual machines resided in two different virtual networks, then you have to specify some of the things so that you can make them to communicate to each other. So all services are able to communicate with each other using an Azure virtual network. Now, now let us come to subnets. Now, as we already saw in the diagram also, that the reason why you wanted to create and partition your virtual network into various different subnets is the very first reason is to you wanted to separate, you wanted to make easy management of your services. Like you all want your public services which are internet facing, which are user facing. So for that you want specific ports, specific rules to be applied at that level. So for this you can create as public subnet. For example, if you have a web server, you want your port 80 for HTTP or maybe port 443 for HTTPS to be opened for the public. So for that you can specify a rule only these two ports are open. While for any private subnet you don't want the people who are residing in the internet to able to communicate to your database which is residing into that. So for this you can deny all of the traffic which is coming from the internet to able to reach your database by using a network security group. So this is one of the primary reason why you wanted to have subnets. So subnets give you easy traffic management. So if we talk about the benefits of having a subnet is of having a subnet, the very first reason oh, of a subnet, the very first reason is easy management. So you can specify whatever rules you want, whatever ports you wanted to open. So along with easy management, you can also specify that okay with so right. So with easy management, you can also specify certain security rules for your subnet. Like if you want your PaaS services, your platform as a services like Azure App Services, Azure Storage Accounts, to be able to communicate only to a specific subnet, not to the public internet. Then you can also do that by attaching a service endpoint with a subnet. So we're gonna see that what are these options as we move ahead. So this is the benefit that why actually you want a subnet to be created. Now some of the best practices that I wanted to share at this point is that your subnet you should be as you already plan about your virtual machine why you wanted to create a network. So you also have to ask yourself that why actually I want to create a subnet. What is the reason for behind creating that subnet? So with this having this in mind, you have to create, you have to plan for the IP addresses that you need. Like for a gateway subnet, a gateway subnet is a particular subnet in which you reside your VPN gateway, and with that VPN gateway you connect it to your on-premises services, your on-premises data center. So for this you don't want to have a very big subnet with 500 or 5000 IP addresses available. You can create a small subnet with slash 27, that means 16 IP addresses available, right? So with this what you did is because uh, you left the space for creation of other subnets as well, because we always wanted to be future ready. Like in the future if your virtual machines, if your services got viral and you need to create some more virtual machines, if you need to create some more servers, then you can create a separate subnet with that, because You haven't consumed all of the IP ranges available in your virtual network address space. I hope that makes sense to you, right? So this is the point of having subnets. Now, what is private IP? As the name also suggests here is that the private IP is an IP is a kind of IP address. We all know that IP address makes communication possible in the internet. Like we all have Aadhaar card, which proves our identity and which tells us that okay, I belong to this in this city, I belong to this in this area. Likewise, for machines, the IP addresses specifies that okay, it is their Aadhaar card, which is specified that okay, that particular machine is belongs to that particular network, right? So with the private IP addresses, you specify that internet will not be able to get into that IP address. Like for if I give you a very simple example, I actually have a oh, virtual machine, and that virtual machine is hosting an Apache web server. Now every virtual machine will be having two IP addresses. The very first IP address will be your public IP address. That means the internet will be able to reach to that IP address. And the second kind of IP address will be the private IP address. And that private IP address is used for your own needs, is used for the virtual networks, is used for the other Azure services to connect to your virtual machine. Like as you can see, this is my virtual machine, which is having my web server. So as you can see, there is two options. The very first is public IP address and the second one is private IP address. Like for public IP address, if I copy this IP address and then go to my web browser, okay, so it is an HTTP website. So as you can see, with the use of public IP address, I am able to see this home page. But if I try to use the private IP address to get into it, I will not be able to reach that, because a private IP address, as we all know, is only meant for the private purposes. So if you have two virtual machines, then those two virtual machines will be able to communicate to each other with using of private IP addresses. So we know that the reason of having a private IP address. Now the very first thing arises that to which services I can connect and attach a private IP address. So the private IP address, one thing to note here is to that the private IP addresses are connected to the NIC or network interface cards of the virtual machines. They are not attached to the virtual machine, right? So if I don't want my virtual machine to have this particular IP address, I don't want it to be 10 dot something, then um, I can change the private IP address of this virtual machine by attaching my network interface card to another virtual network. So as you can see, this is the network interface. When I go to that, right? So or what you can do is you can go to the VNets, where that is your virtual networks. Actually, I have only one virtual network. So let me show you that how can you connect. So you can go to connected devices and then you can see the NIC of my virtual network. So if you have any other virtual network, then you can associate the NIC to different virtual network, right? You can connect the private IP address to your internal load balancer. So by connecting your private IP address to your internal load balancer, what benefit you will get is that your services will be able to communicate using the private IP addresses. That means the traffic, the data is not going to the internet. The data is still using the Azure backbone network, and hence it is more secure, because we know that internet is filled of bad people who are always ready to hack your network, right? So and you have two kind of IP addresses. The very first is dynamic and second one is static. Now, so the major difference between the two is that the static IP address just gives you an IP address, right? So either you delete the virtual machine, either you do something, the IP address will not be changed. While with dynamic IP address, it attached to the life cycle of that particular service. Like if you delete that virtual machine, that IP address will also be deleted. That IP address will also be lost. Like for a very simple example, if I actually try to restart my virtual machine, then I can show you that the IP address will be changed. So why this happened? Because by default we get dynamic IP address. So if I stop this virtual machine, this public IP will be disappeared. And when as you can note this public IP, let me note it so that we can clearly find out the difference. Right now the IP of my virtual machine is this. Now when we will restart the virtual machine, the IP address will be changed. So the default allocation of an IP address is dynamic. That means whenever I start or stop the virtual machine, then the IP address will be changed. While it is static, the IP address will be same. Now if I ask you that what is the reason of having two different kind of IP addresses? Why don't I have a static one so that my IP address does not change? Now one reason is that there is a cost associated with the IP addresses. Like if you create an IP address in Azure, then you have to pay something for this. Now for static IP is more expensive because either your machine is working, it is not working, it is being deleted. Unless that IP address is deleted, you have to pay for that. While for dynamic, if you actually shut down your virtual machine, you stop your virtual machine, then you will not be able to pay for that IP address. So this is the major difference. Now if you ask me that what are the use cases of having a static IP address, the use cases could be that if you have a DNS server which is created in your virtual machine, you have an Azure domain services, Active Directory domain services. So for this you don't want the IP address to change. So for that you can specify a static IP address. I hope my virtual machine should be stopped by now. As you can see, the public IP disappeared as soon as the virtual machine was stopped. Now if I again start this virtual machine, the IP address will be changed. Now as you can see, the starting and stopping disappear the IP address. Now till it is starting, let us explore about the regions. Now while the creation of VNet, we saw that a VNet is a scope to a single region. That means now if you ask me that what is the benefit of having my VNet to be scoped to a particular location or a particular region. Now the reason for this is like for an example, like you have your users in the US region, then you can create your servers, your databases in the US central region so that your users will be having a minimum latency while connected to the services. While you have your on-premises data center in India, so for that you can create a virtual network in central India region and then you can connect to your on-premises data center. Now by having this virtual networks distributed across various regions in Azure, you are leveraging the power of cloud. The one of the reason for people migrating to cloud is its global reach. Now whether you wanted to deploy your services to UK, whether you wanted to deploy your services to Hong Kong, you can with few clicks provision that. Now this is the major rationale behind a virtual network being scoped to a particular region. So as per your needs, as per your compliance needs, as per your requirements, as per your customers requirements, you can go ahead and specify a virtual network in that particular region. And once if you at some point of time if you want to connect various virtual networks which are residing in different regions, you can peer those virtual networks. Now how will peer those virtual networks, we're gonna see in some moment, right? So this is the reason for having your virtual networks to be scoped to a particular region. So let me create a virtual network. So first we have to go to the virtual network. We have to go to create virtual network. Then choose a resource group, subscription, name it, choose a region. After choosing a region, you have to specify the IP addresses. You can add a subnet according to your needs. So once you specify the subnet according to what IP addresses you want, you can specify that okay, this is a subnet name actually. So give it subnet 1. Specify the IP address range. I want the IP address to be 8.0.10/16. Okay, please give me a moment. Hmm. So as you can see that in this particular one, my 5 IP addresses will be reserved, right? Now, this is not a best practice. That means I actually covering the whole IP of my virtual network. So this is not a best practice. Always you must be having some spaces left for so that you can create further subnets whenever you want that. You can click on add. You can create as many subnets that you want. You can go to security. You can specify whether you want a Bastion host to be enabled. A Bastion host actually works as a single point of contact for um, your Azure virtual machines and other services. So for Azure Bastion host actually creates a special subnet for itself because behind the scenes it is actually creating many virtual machines. That's why I said that you should be having some space left for your Bastion host. Asking for address space and you can specify 192. So I think slash 27 will be enough, which give its 32 addresses. Now every Bastion host should be having a public IP addresses. Now you also, if you want, you can also create a DDoS protection. That means denial of service protection and firewall. Now there's all are optional. It's all up to your need that what you wanted and what you want to do in that particular virtual network. That will take some time to be created. It will take almost 1 minute to be created. So this was the reason that why Azure was having virtual machines sorry virtual networks to be scoped in various different regions because you can connect your virtual networks, you can connect other data centers, you can connect to another services by using your peering, by using your various other options available like express route, like VPN gateways. So with this you can connect to various different networks. So okay, taking a bit long than usual to be created. So till then let us move ahead with slides. Now I showed you actually that how can you create a virtual network. Now one thing to note here is that you should not be having overlapping IP addresses. Like for example, you have your on-premises IP, you have your on-prem IP as 10.0.0.0/16, and then you go ahead and create a virtual network with an IP address 10.0.1/. So this is not acceptable because this particular IP is gets included or it is contained within this IP address. So the virtual network will be created without any issue. But when you will try to connect these two networks, then it will throw you an error, right? So that is why it is always advised that you, after being aware about your address spaces of your virtual networks, you then create a virtual network. Now, in addition to having creating your virtual network through a portal, you can also create your virtual network through PowerShell or through the Cloud Shell or to Azure CLI. Now let me show you that how can you create that using Cloud Shell. You can also do the similar steps by using Azure a CLI installed locally on your machine. Like I have a simple shell script. So let me show that shell script to you. No such file. Okay. Cat vnet. So this is my simple shell script. So it firstly asks me about the resource group. So using AZ network vnet create command and specifying a resource group by -g, specifying the name of the virtual network with -n and the address prefix that I want. I can create a virtual network, right? And inside that I can also create subnets, as you can see over here. So if I wanted to create a virtual network, so uh, let me firstly create a virtual network. Let me change the region. I want the region to be Japan East. Now everything everything looks fine for now. So let me run the shell script. It is asking for I forgot the resource group name. So what is the name of my resource group? Let me grab that name of my resource group. It is VPN demo, all in capital. Oh, the virtual network with this name already exists. That is why it is showing me error. As you can see, here it already exists in the location Central India. Okay, I was not sure about the name. Okay, so let me change the name. So let me name my VNet as let me name my VNet as work VNet. Once I did that, I have to change it everywhere. So in addition to if you want to know about the how what are these commands, then you can always go to the documentation of Azure. You can simply type on your what we can say. You can simply go to your browser, search for VNet creation CLI, and then you will get the commands. Then using which commands you can create your virtual machine using PowerShell as well as CLI. It says no such resource group. So Let me leave that. So you can create your virtual machines using this, right? Now if you want to know about the commands, then always you can go to your search engine and then search for VNet or virtual network create CLI. Then as you can see, you'll get the options for docs.microsoft.com, and in that you can always find the commands which are necessary to create your virtual machine. As you can see, this is the commands: name, resource group, subnet name, right? So you can always go ahead and do that. Now you can check the Microsoft Learn modules for deepening your knowledge. Now, as far as of now, we already discussed about that how virtual networks can help you, how virtual networks can help you to mm, communicate between the services, right? Now if I ask you that how can you configure your public services like your load balancers, like your virtual machines. So for this you need a public IP address. The public IP address means, I showed you a few moments earlier, that with a private IP address you can't uh, uh, internet or the users which are using internet to connect to their services. For this you actually wanted to have a public IP address. Now a public IP address needs in various different services in Azure, whether all of the public services, whether it is a virtual machine, whether it is a load balancer which is talking to the clients, a VPN gateway which uses internet for connecting to your on premises, an application gateway which is which is a layer 7 load balancing option, your Azure firewall or your NAT gateway. So as you can see, a network translation address translation gateway or NAT gateway also connects your virtual machines privately to the internet. So whenever you want your services to talk to internet with some manner, then you need to have a public IP address, right? So as you can see, there is also an option of dynamic as well as static. Static one means it, you have to pay whether your service is running, it is deleted or not. While dynamic means then that you'll be only paying for the services whenever they are running, right? So there's also two different kind of SKUs whenever you wanted to create a public IP. So a basic SKU, as you can see, then it is of course cheaper than the standard one, but it has less features to offer. So as you can see that you can choose the static or dynamic allocation, but it is open by default. That means everyone can connect to this public IP address, right? And there is no support for availability zones. As we know that various availability zone within a region means the various different data centers within that region. So this public IP address um, will not be spanning different availability zones. Now basic SKU can only be attached to basic SKU of VPN gateways, public load balancers. That means if you created, we all know that a stock keeping unit and SKU in Azure actually specify that what features you'll be getting and how much you're gonna pay for that, for those features. Basic one always hints that it will be cheap, but it will be providing you less features. And this context also applies to your load balancers, your application gateways. Like for example, you create a basic SKU load balancer, you'll be having less features, and only basic SKU public IP will be able to attach to basic SKU load balancer. Otherwise, it will be showing you an error, right? So this is you can say a provision made by Microsoft. While with the standard one, you will be having a static allocation method, and because it is static, whether your services are running or not, you have to pay for the IP address. Then it is a bit more costly than the basic one. Now it spans various availability zones. So if I go to the portal and show you that how can you create a public IP address, then you have to go to the search bar, search for public IP, So these are the public IPs which already created whenever I create a services which requires a public IP. Remember while we were creating a virtual machine, it was asking us for creation of an public IP. When we were creating a Bastion host, then also it was asking us for a public IP. So a public IP is needed. Now you can select the version of whether you want IPv4 or IPv6 or you want both. Again, the SKU as we discussed, that with the SKU that you choose, you get various features. Like for example, if I choose a basic one, then this tier option get grayed out. I cannot select whether this IP should be regional or global. And as you can see, there are very less options. You only have an option on DNS label, right? So you only have this options available. Now, if whenever I choose a standard one, like for example this, then as you can see, I cannot choose the IP allocation method. But by choosing this, I can go ahead and choose this availability zone option. Like within this region, up to whichever data centers I wanted to replicate this IP address. Whether I want in all three, then I can choose zone redundant. If I don't want any zone, then I can choose no zone, right? So this is up to your own needs that what actually you want. Uh, what routing preference you want, whether you want the Microsoft network to be routed or you want it to route it through internet. And finally go to create. Choose any resource group, choose a location, and then your IP will be created. Once your IP will be created, any of the services which is residing in the same region, like my IP that I created is residing in Central India region. So whenever I create a new services which is having Central India region, I'll be able to associate that IP address to that particular service. Now I showed you already that how can you create an IP address. Now, now let us first come to how can you design a name resolution for your Azure Virtual Network? Because we know about the concept of DNS, which is domain name servers. Now we all know that whether if you want to go to any particular service, you don't type the IP address of the service. Like if you want to go to bing.com, if you want to go to the Microsoft website, you just simply type microsoft.com and then you will end it to that particular website. We don't type the IP address for that website. Now a service which helps us to convert the IP addresses into the the domain names is known as DNS, a domain name server or a domain name service. So with DNS, it provides a mapping that okay, if this is the IP of my web server, then this particular IP will be now called as www.azure.me, right? So who is that? Who saves this record that okay, if someone is asking for www.azure.me, then I have to convert that to this particular IP address because computers, as you all understand, that they only understand binary and IP is your Aadhaar card. IP is your proof. IP is your way for various devices for various services to communicate to each other. So for this we have domain name servers or DNS. Now you can also create your DNS services in Azure. Now while creating a creation of a DNS services, you also have two options in Microsoft Azure. So the very first option is you firstly have to ask yourself that for which services I am creating my particular DNS. Whether I want a particular DNS, a particular domain name for my public services, my web servers, my websites, my e-commerce platform, or I'm creating this DNS zone for my private services, for my organization services like my payroll services, my HR service, which need not to be able for the people from the internet to connect to that. I only want my organization's people to connect to that particular service. Then for that you also have a private DNS zones available, and we will explore all of this as we move ahead. So coming first to the a public DNS. Now, as we know that whenever you type domain name, this domain name means any website URL. So for any particular domain name, it actually get maps to a particular IP address as we saw in this example. Now, there are a lot of steps that is go behind the scene, but we are not discussing about that. Our prime focus here is to understand the working of public DNS zones. So with a public DNS zones, you use the name servers or the servers which actually converts this domain name to a particular IP address without you a creation of your own DNS name servers. You use the wide variety of name servers available by Microsoft Azure. And as we know that Microsoft is a global company, it will be having a lots and lot of name servers, and they will be highly available. That means there is almost no downtime expected for these name servers. That means it will never happen like some while ago it was happened with Facebook, that the DNS servers were not able to reach to that Facebook server, and there was a outage in Facebook. Though that happened with because of BGP, which is product gateway protocol, but eventually the DNS servers were not able to translate www.facebook.com into the IP address of that Facebook server. So with using the name servers of Azure, you make sure that this not happens with your particular website, right? Now, if you ask me that, okay, I already have the options of GoDaddy, I already have the options of various other private services. Why should I use Azure DNS service? Now the reason is, as I already mentioned, the reason is one of the biggest reason is global availability. So with Azure DNS service, you get global availability, right? Almost no downtime and very less money you have to spend. Now one thing to note here is in Azure DNS you can't purchase domains. Like if you want particular domain to be purchased, like if you, because we all know that firstly we have to purchase a domain, right? Um, like if I give you an example of domain name, then if I talk about that Azure dot engineer dot com. So here this is my particular domain name, and I any organization can have only one domain name. So it will be globally unique. No other organization can have the same word to word domain name, right? We all are aware of that. So firstly we have to purchase a domain name, and if I ask about that which organization handles all of this, then this is iCanon, right? So I'm not getting into much detail that what is the science behind this domain name. One thing you don't note here is that you can't buy domain names in Azure. So if I can't buy domain names, then what is the benefit of having Azure domains, Azure DNS zones? So it is used to host your DNS records, because we know that we have to create a record. We have to create a mapping that okay, sir, if uh, uh, what happened? So you have to create a mapping that okay, sir, if anything happened, if someone is asking for my website, then please give this and this IP address to a particular web browser, right? Now, so far, if you so we know that a DNS zone, a zone is just like a file, right? So a DNS zone is particular like a file, and in that file you created various records, right? So if this is your particular DNS zone, A zone means it can be your particular domain name, like it can be something whatever you have purchased, and in that you created various different records. You created various different records like an A record, which is for IP addresses, a CNAME record, quad A record for IPv6 addresses, an MX record for mail exchange, a TXT record, so on and so forth, right? So inside a particular domain, you have different records. Now, if I come back to my question, if I can't buy domains in Azure, what is the reason I should switch after buying a domain in another private service like GoDaddy, like name.com, like Namecheap? Why should I choose Azure to host my particular domain? As I mentioned that the only reason that you have is high availability. Azure gives you really high availability and Azure guarantees that you will be facing least downtime as compared to other domain services. And we all understand that because Microsoft is a very global company, it is very huge in size, and of course you'll be getting much more features, right? And also, if you ask me that, okay, so for saving any records, for creating a particular domain, a DNS zone in Azure, do I need to buy a domain first? Then the answer is no. Without even buying a domain, you can create a DNS zone. That means you can actually save records. You can save IP addresses and their mappings and their names. Okay, so let me show you that how can you do that. So if I say that, okay, so this is my domain name, this is my zone. As you can see that you can't this it doesn't ask you for any reason a region, because DNS is a global service, as we all know. Now I do not have any domain purchased like the name of this unnamed.azure, but then also I'll be able to create a DNS zone, and I will also be able to create records in that. But the only condition is that if I want my public, if I want my customers to be able to search for any domain and then able to reach that domain, then I have to create and buy a domain first. So as you can see, these are the various name servers which is being allocated by Azure, right? I can also add records. So if I want www.azure to be pointing to a particular IP address, then I can specify the IP address, or maybe my web server, maybe of any other services that I want. So you can specify the IP address one that you wanted, right? You can specify the TTL, which is time to live, that for how much time this particular will be record will be saved in a nearby Azure region. Like if you are in Indonesia and this particular name server is near Indonesia, then if someone asks me for, okay, give me www.anani.azure, which is my domain name, then that particular record will be saved in this particular name server, or it will be cached in this particular name server for TTL, or time to live time period. If I said save it for, cache it for 1 hour, it will be 1 hour will be cached. So by caching, it will not be have to go through various processes which actually resolve are included in name resolution of DNS, right? So there was so this was how you can create a public DNS zones. Now if you ask me that, you said me that DNS record zones do not need to be buy any domain name for that, then for what condition we have to buy a domain? So as I mentioned that if you want your domain to be publicly routable, then you have to, after, like for example, if I give you a very simple example of my domain, so I buy this domain Ananya Ojha Rocks using name.com. So and these are the name servers, and after buying the domain I have to go to my domain name provider. After going to my domain name provider, because this is through this I buy my domain, so let me sign in and show you that how can you configure Azure name servers to be used for your particular domain. So if I log in, so as you can see, this is the domain that I buy through name.com, but this domain is not using the name.com name servers. As you can see, it is using Azure name servers. As you can see, the various name servers options available. So with this, actually what happened is that they are using the global name servers available for Microsoft, right? So even if I try to show you using the ns lookup command, which is name server lookup, if I actually query that, okay, which is the start of authority SOA type record, so which name servers actually is storing this domain name, then it will be showing me the Azure name server's name. Oh, maybe there's something glitch. Maybe I added extra space. Okay, let me fix this. Earlier this wasn't happening. Why this happened? Can't find server address for Ojha Rocks. Maybe I just give me a moment, guys. The domain name is okay. Everything is okay. Then why it is showing that? Hmm, it shouldn't be showing in that manner. Something is wrong. Maybe I forgot the command. Ns lookup type Ojha. Okay, it is not able to show it. I don't know why. Maybe I forgot it in the command. Mm, so sorry guys, I'm not able to recall that command. Maybe I do a quick search. Okay, and then look up SOA record. Type equals SOA. So I was missing that equal actually. NS look up dash type equals SOA. Then goes my domain name. So as you can see, the primary name server is my Azure name server. As you can see, Now it is showing me the various different options. So by this, though I purchased the domain from another domain provider, I shifted its ownership from this domain provider to Azure. So now for creation of any records, for creation of any more IP addresses, I do not need to use this domain name. I can create any other IP address by using Azure itself. As you see that I created an mapping for azure.ananyaojar.rocks with this particular IP address, right? And I think this is the IP address of my virtual machine, and because I stopped and then restarted my virtual machine, that IP address will be surely being changed. I'm pretty much sure for that. So it is changed. So if I go to my web browser and then try searching for it, I will not be finding anything, because earlier it was working as the IP address of my virtual machine, but now it is not. Yeah. And as you know that whenever you create a new record, it takes of almost half an hour or sometimes something like that to being what we can say, for being able to communicate to other services. That means for 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 you to reach to that particular IP address using the domain name, you need some time. You have to give some time. So even if I try to get the IP of my virtual machine and then specify that IP in my domain name, it will be taking some time to be populated. So let me do that, and once we are wrapping up the session, we'll be checking it. So I can go and create a record set. I want it www. I want an A record for this particular IP address. Click OK. So this record is particularly created. Now if I go to this public particular IP address, I do not think that I'll be able to reach my Apache homepage, because it will not be populated. Oh, so I'm able to reach that. As you can see, I am able to reach that. So this is www.ananyaojar.rocks. So it was very fast. Normally it takes some time, but as you can see, as soon as I specified the particular IP address, this IP address was able to reach using public IP. Now if I, so this particular domain I do not own anywhere. If I create a record set, the same record set over here also, then I will not be able to reach to that www, and then the DNS zone. Okay, so let me AZ. I again specify the same IP address, but this time I will not be able to reach it via internet, because nowhere I have purchased that particular IP. So if I go to az/ananya.azure, I will not be able to see this Apache homepage. Slash Azure. As you can see, though they were both pointing to the same IP of my virtual machine, I will not be able to see that because I do not own any domain. That is why, right? So if you want your domain to be publicly routable, then you can do that. If you don't want, then you can always, for demo purposes, for learning purposes, you can create DNS zone, right? Now if you ask me that, okay, what is the pricing of all these services, then you can always go to the pricing page of Azure. Under the pricing, you can go, either you can go to the pricing calculator, or you can go to the networking services. Under networking, you can go to Azure DNS, and then you can see the pricing over here. So for first 25 zones that you created, you have to pay for only this much, only 40 rupees per month. So as you can see, it is very cheap. And for first billion, you have to pay this much, 30 rupees. Now if you have more requests coming, then you have to pay even less. So Azure DNS is much cheap than GoDaddy or any other DNS providers. So as well as cost and as well as high availability, these are the two main big options for which you have to go for Azure DNS services. Right? Now moving ahead with our session, we discussed about the public DNS, but we also have the option for private DNS. So if I wanted to start the slideshow from here, okay, it started from the beginning. Let me go to the slide. So this was about the public DNS zones. Now we also discussed about DNS delegation, that how you want to configure your Azure DNS to be owner of your domain name that you purchased somewhere else. So for that you have to delete after going to your domain name provider, you have to delete their DNS records and then replace those name server records with Azure name servers, as you can see over here. And it will take almost 24 hours to be functioning really well, right? We also discussed about how can you create a record set in Azure DNS. Now, like any other domain provider, you also have a variety of options available to create the DNS, right? Now, sometimes you also have a private DNS service. So, if you ask me that, okay, DNS is something from which we can get the IP address of a web server. Like for Microsoft.com, I get a particular IP behind the scenes without even the customer knowing that. Why I wanted to create a private DNS service? So the answer, you can find the answer using this. So if you have some private services which you don't want from the internet to reach, like your HR services, your internal learner management system or LMS system. So for those kind of services, you want your employees, by using their company's laptop, their company's virtual network, they can connect to the particular services. So for that, you can create a private DNS zones. Now with private DNS zones, you don't have to buy any domain somewhere. A private DNS zone, you don't have to buy any domain somewhere, because that is not publicly routable. Only your virtual network which are being associated with those private DNS will be able to watch the record that you created, right? So for this particular example also, we have DNS domains, we have two different virtual networks, and these two virtual networks are connected to each other either using peering or using side-to-side VPN connections. In this, we have various different virtual machines as well. Now, whenever a, a virtual machine says that, okay, I wanted to connect to this another virtual machine, but for this, I don't want to use its IP address. I do not want to use its private IP address because I don't remember that. Instead, I wanted to use a domain name of this virtual machine. And because these two services are private, internet does not needs to be connected. So I created a private DNS zone. And with that private DNS zone, I'll be able to communicate with each other without buying any domain. So as you can see, DNS queries are being forwarded between VNets using the DNS zones. Not only the VNets, even if you have your on-premises DNS servers, if any of your computer on your on-premises tries to connect to the virtual machine in Azure, then the DNS queries can also be forwarded. When your on-premises on your Azure is connected using a VPN gateway or an express route, right? So if I gave you an explanation how it actually happens, then we have to come to this particular diagram. So within a virtual network, you have a particular virtual machine, and then that virtual machine either wanted to connect or ping to another virtual machine. So firstly, it will be going to the private DNS of Azure. So without actually, before explaining it, let us go to the Azure portal and create a private DNS zones to better understand what is actually happening. So for creation of a private DNS zone, you have to click on create. As always, specify the resource group, specify the name. So I want this name to be DNS demo, then review and create. So it will take some time to be created. Okay, it will take some time. So meanwhile, while this is created, let me explore that already that I have a private DNS zone. So this is my private DNS zone, which is named as dns.com. I so after you create a private DNS zone, you have to link a virtual network. So on the left hand side, you have to go to virtual network links. So as you can see, this is my link name, and I um, connected my workload VNet to this private DNS zone. So every virtual machine which is being created in that workload VNet with auto registration enabled, that means if I create a new virtual machine in this particular VNet, then that will be auto populated. Like for example, if I go to virtual machines, if I try to create any particular virtual machine, it will take some time. So we are skipping the virtual machine creation part. We will just be we will be just be focusing upon that how can we connect these two virtual machines. So we are skipping all of these part. Oh, so let me quickly specify a password and a domain for this. Quickly jump over to networking to make sure that, or else, okay. So let me create it in another subnet. So now you can, now quickly this virtual machine will be created. It will take some time. So meanwhile, now let us explore about the our DNS zone, our private DNS zone. So because private DNS zone, so this is the DNS demo that we just now created. Now it is just now does not associate with anything. So we can go ahead and specify a virtual network link. We can add any virtual network. You can give any link name, attach any virtual network. By enabling auto registration, whenever a new virtual machine is created, deleted, something like that happens, then you don't have to manually create a record set that okay, this is the IP of a virtual network, please register that. You don't have to do that. By auto registration, it will be automatically populated, right? And this was the setting that I created for my earlier DNS zone. I just now created an Linux virtual machine. As you can see, this IP address, a private IP address, is automatically populated. The reason why it is using private IP, not public IP, because it is a private DNS zone. And as I mentioned in the very beginning, that Azure services uses private IPs to connect to each other. They do not want public IP. By using private IP, they make sure that they are using Microsoft Backbone network to connect. Hence, they are not using internet. If they are not using internet, they are much more secure, right? So, so this is the IP address. Now, if I give you a very simple example, my AZ-1 virtual machine is having an Apache web server installed. So whenever I go to az1.dns.com, then I should be watching the what we can say. I should be watching that particular Apache homepage. But if I go to my web browser az1.dns.com, I will not be able to show that particular virtual machine or that particular Apache homepage. Why? Because this record set is actually in a private DNS zone. Only the virtual network, only the machines which are associated with that virtual network will be able to see this record set. Like for example, I have this Windows VM. In this Windows VM, so please give me a moment. Let me open my web browser in this VM. Okay, maybe a quick refresh fix things. Yeah. So if I go here for az1.dns.com, then I am able to see this web page. Why? Because this virtual machine is residing in my virtual network, and with that virtual network, I actually have my what we can say. I actually have my my DNS private DNS being associated. That is why only this machine is able to know that okay, this DNS actually means that particular IP address, while my web browser is not able to reach to that. So this is the power of private DNS. So instead of Apache homepage, I can have my payroll, my HR, my my organization's HR application, my organization's learner management system, my organization's internal work systems, while like my audit website, my something like that. So only my employees will be able to access that website, but the internet will not be able to. And for this, I don't have to create any buy any domain. So this is the power of private DNS zones in Azure, right? So what actually happens? It requests the private DNS zone and then it responds the private IP, and eventually you are able to connect. Okay. Now the scenarios includes that when you don't want your IP address to be publicly accessible, right? Now you can I already showed you that how can you create a zone and then we can create a record set. Now if you wanted to configure, so I already showed you that how can you create a DNS zone, how you can enable auto registration. How? Okay, so let me able to ping my virtual machines using the private DNS zones. The sorry, the domain names. Okay, Central India, maybe I think they are in both. So by using the run command, I can run a simple ping command. So I'll be able to ping Win VM. It is a Windows. I will be able to ping this one dns.com. The two. So it will be pinging. It will be ping this. What we can say two times. At last we'll be having an echo command. So let us run this shell script. So what actually we are doing is we have two virtual machines which are residing in a particular virtual network, though in different subnets. But because that particular virtual network is associated with a private IP with a private DNS zone, then they know each other. They know the DNS name, and they will be able to ping each other. So as you can see, there is 0% packet loss, and two packets are transmitted successfully. Not only for this, even for the other one. If I go to the AZ-1 VM, go to the run command, and then I run that. Okay, ping my another machine, maybe this time 5 times, and the name of my virtual machine plus the name of the private DNS zone that I created. In my case, it is dns.com. Then click on the run command. So instead of using the private IP of my this Linux virtual machine, I'll be able to ping to that. Ping to that means, as you all know, that they both are able to communicate with each other. So it will take some time. Okay, it is taking some time. Okay, as you can see, 0% packet loss, 5 packets transmitted successfully. So they are able to ping each other, right? Now, how can we enable cross-VNET connectivity with peering? So coming first to our diagram, the company's requirement was that okay, and the company's you can say the managers firstly wanted to make sure that how can I make my customers to able to reach my services. Now once they have understood that okay, um, I can specify um, I can specify and make my customers to reach only particular subnets. I can make the virtual machines, I can make the various services to communicate with each other within an Azure virtual network. Now if I want my two of the virtual networks to be able to communicate with each other, how can I do that? So with this we have a concept of Azure virtual network peering. So firstly let us go to the virtual networks and peer two virtual networks. So as as of now I have three virtual networks all in different region. This is Central India, this is Japan East. So if you peer the virtual networks in the same region, like if I peer this one and this one, because they are in the same region, then it will be known as a regional peering. While if I connect the first one and the second one, because they are in different regions, Japan and Central India, this will be known as global peering. So in any of this I have a Bastion host. I don't know in which of one I have a Bastion host. So let me find out. Okay, so this is not the one. I am pretty sure this will be the. So let me verify the which is in which I am having a Bastion host, and then after peering, okay, this one. Okay, so in this I have a Bastion host. A Bastion host is with the use of Bastion host, you can connect to your virtual machines using the your browser. So if I go to my this particular virtual machine right now, let me grab that. So if I go to my Linux virtual machine, if I go to sorry, so if I go to my Linux virtual machine, if I go to connect and I go to Bastion, then it will be asking me to firstly create a Bastion host. So as you can see, it is asking me to deploy a Bastion. But if I peer the two networks, then I will show you. So firstly, you have to go to your virtual network, then go to peerings. Now, one thing to note here is that not only the virtual network that you created within your subscription, you can peer, you can connect. Peering simply means connecting. So you can connect virtual networks either to another subscriptions within your Azure organization or tenant, or even to another subscriptions as well. So how can you do that? So there are various options available as well. Traffic to remote virtual network. So with this, if you wish to allow communication between two virtual networks, right? So if you want the traffic forwarding to be available. So as you can see, if you don't want any of the option, you don't know that what it actually does, then you can go to the I button, and after that you can find out that okay, what is the meaning of that particular option, right? So you can name the peering. So whenever you click on I know my resource ID, so with this you can specify the. So let me show it to you. So with this, if you have any virtual network which is residing in on any other Azure account, any other Azure subscription, so you can do that. Because if you're having a peering within your own resource group within your subscription, then you can choose the subscription name, you can choose the virtual network, whatever virtual network which is having within the subscription. But if you want to connect various virtual networks, then suppose this is your another Azure account, then go to your virtual network, then go to properties, and in that you can grab the resource ID. So as you can see, it is specifying the subscription. Inside the subscription, it is specifying the resource name, resource group name, and with that. So in case of any other subscription, these IDs will be changed. It will be different ID, and with that, you can connect your virtual networks with that. As you can see, it is not asking me for any subscription name or something like that. Okay. Then you can click on add. Now the peerings in Azure is two-way. That means whenever you create a peering, the communication from both this virtual network to the another virtual network, and from another virtual network to this virtual network will be enabled. So it will take some time. So the traffic will be able to flow in and out from this particular virtual network. So remember, this Bastion option was asking us to deploy Bastion. So whenever this peering will happen, it will not be asking us to deploy a Bastion host. So it is taking some time. Now it is showing connected. And because this particular virtual network is also have a Bastion being deployed, then it should not be asking us to deploy Bastion right now. I think it will take some time to be populated. Okay. Go to peering. It is being peer to workload VNet. So it will, I think it will take some time. Maybe I need to reload the page. So as you can see, now it is not asking us to deploy Bastion, because what happened actually is that, so let me show that with the diagram, that I actually have my this particular virtual network, right? Inside the particular virtual network, I have my Bastion, which is actually used to connect to your virtual machine using a browser. There is no option for Azure Bastion. So let me use this as an Azure Bastion. I have my Azure Bastion. This is my virtual network and its name is AZ-700, which is actually a virtual network that I created. Right now, what I did is I actually created any other virtual network which was having a virtual machine, virtual, yeah. So this VNet is actually having a virtual machine. Now this VNet name is workload virtual network. Inside that I have an virtual machine named, not only this virtual machine, every machine that I have inside the not only this, every virtual machine that I have inside that virtual network will be able to connect to this Azure Bastion, right? So I am leveraging the power of Azure Bastion by using virtual network peering, right? So I hope you understood how actually I am using Azure Bastion and why I would any organization would want to do that. The very simple reason for this is because Azure Bastion charges you on hourly basis, right? So you for if you have when you virtual networks, you have 5 to 6 virtual networks, you don't want to create 5 or 6 different Azure Bastions. So with the use of single Bastion, you can control the browser based. You can sign in to your virtual network using browser. So with this, you made the best use of your money. Then this we can use this power of connecting to virtual networks, right? And now it may also known as a hub and spoke topology. So all of the costly services or all of the services which you wanted to share between various virtual networks, then you can use this option, right? Like you have any other virtual network and you want that virtual network to be connected to the Azure version as well, then again you can specify that. You can connect both using peering. So this kind of topology is known as hub and spoke topology, right? So by peering, both are able to use the Azure Bastion. So you don't have to for logging into your virtual machine using browser, you don't have to use Azure Bastion and deploy Azure Bastion for every one of them, right? If I quickly show you that how can you get into using Azure Bastion. Hopefully I wrote the right password. Pop-up blog. So I'll be able to connect using Azure Bastion. As you can see, now I am connected into my Linux virtual machine, right? As you can see, it's Azure. So this is the power of peering. Now let us move back to the slides. So we already saw about VNet peering. Then what are the kind of VNet peering? If you connect VNets across regions, then this is known as regional or global peering. While if you connect the VNets within a same Azure region, then this is known as regional peering. Now, peering is not limited only to your Azure account. It can uh, go across subscriptions, and I already showed you right now. So this is what I was talking about, the hub and spoke topology. So we have a VPN gateway, and you have a virtual network which is connecting to your on-premises. Then you can make the two different virtual networks to be able to communicate with this using peering. So what you can do is you can peer your these three virtual networks to each other. Once you peer all of them through user-defined routing, which is known as UDR. So with this, you can make sure that whenever you want your very only scanned data to able to go to your on premises, then firstly what will happen is the traffic, the request from this virtual machine, because these are peered, will go to this particular network virtual appliance or NVA. The NVA will check the traffic. Okay, if it is genuine traffic, if it is safe, then it will be going to VPN gateway. Once it went to the VPN gateway, it can reach your on premises because there is an VPN tunnel being established, or because there is no direct connection between VNet A or VNet B. That means there is, as you can see, no direct connection. If this virtual machine wanted to connect to this particular virtual machine, then what you can do is you can allow gateway transit on your VPN gateway, and in this here also you have a VPN connection. So with this, the traffic will from this virtual network will actually reach this virtual network by going through hub VNet, right? So actually VPN gateway is not allowed while peering, as we already saw, but if you want your encrypted traffic to be able to flow between networks, so for that kind of encryption, for that kind of IPsec tunnels, you can deploy a VPN gateway. One thing to note here, to peer your virtual networks, you don't be having overlapping IP addresses. That we can see all of these IP addresses of virtual networks are different. They're not overlapping, right? I already showed you that how can you configure your peerings. Now, as you can see that as I told you earlier slide also, that gateway transit allow the spoke networks. That means which is connected to a network to able to share between each other. So if there is no direct connectivity between this spoke RM and spoke classic, then also using the hub RM, they can communicate with each other. Now service chaining. As I said that certain things like if you have a network virtual appliance, that means you have a firewall, maybe a Barracuda, maybe Cisco firewall, maybe you use your virtual machine deployed in Azure as a firewall. Now, if you don't want, because you can't trust your employees, if you don't want any of your employee to share all of the information from your virtual machine to internet, so for this you want a firewall to be in place. You want a firewall to check that what data is going out of my virtual network. So for this you can specify a user defined route. So with the use of that user defined route, you can make sure that okay, whenever the traffic is going from my virtual network to internet, firstly route it or direct or transfer the traffic to my NVA. Then after the going to the NVA, as you can see, like if it going to for on premises, firstly it will go to the NVA. The NVA will check it whether it is a genuine traffic or not. After checking, it will be forwarding it to on premises, right? So for this you have to use user defined route or N or UDR. Now if you ask me that okay, so is this the only use case of user defined routes? No, you can have various other use cases as well. So the other use case is could be that if you connected two different cloud providers, like if you connected your AWS, if you connected your Azure through a VPN tunnel, then by the use of user defined routes, you can specify a route. So let me go to a particular virtual network and let me give you an example of the routes. UTES effective routes. Okay. Okay, just give me a moment. Networking effect. Think I should be getting a effective route option. Okay, yeah. Go to your NIC, network interface card, because every kind of networking option is controlled by using NIC in every VM. Now here go to effective routes. So let us. So there are very different routes available already, right? So there is various different routes. So because this virtual network is peered, so it is saying that okay, our workload VNet was having actually three address spaces. First was 10.0.0/16, another was 192.168, and the third one was 8.0.0. So this route was automatically created that okay, uh, whenever a virtual machine is trying to connect to these address spaces, then the next hop, the request will be going to the virtual network global peering, right? So it is already showing us. You can also specify your own routes if you want to by going to the route tables. You can go ahead and create a route table for you, and after you create a route table you can attach that route table to any particular um, sub virtual network, right? So it will take some time. So actually as you saw, by service chaining you can leverage a single service like Bastion, like firewall, like DDoS protection, which is actually costly. You can leverage its facilities to various different VNets, right? So if you go to routes, you can add a route. Like for example, I deployed AWS to Azure. So I actually connected AWS and Azure by using a VPN gateway. Then in the address prefix, I can specify the subnet of my AWS, uh, the VPC address space. Like my AWS VPC, for example, is having an address space of this 10.16.0.0 slash maybe 27. So this is the address prefix of my AWS VPC, right? Then I want it to go to my VPN gateway, virtual network gateway, and because I do not have any VPN gateway, that where it is not showing me address. So otherwise, it would have showed me the address of my VPN gateway. So once I did that, that route will be added. So whenever my virtual machines are requesting to connect to the AWS VPC, then that will be first, because of the routes, it will be first being routed to the VPN gateway, and then it will be eventually routed to AWS. So with this, you can leverage the power of routes, right? So let me quickly come to the slide. We covered DNS. We're talking about. Okay, so we already connected two virtual networks using peering. So this is a more real world kind of example. So if you have your research center located in Southeast Asia, maybe Hong Kong, You have your on-premise data center in Azure, sorry, in USA, maybe Virginia region, and you have your another factory in London or Europe. Then you can create according to your customers, according to your latency, you can create the VNets in those particular regions. According to your needs, you can either connect your on-premises, and then you can create various other subnets with that, like a gateway subnet, which will be having a VPN gateway, which is responsible for connecting your on-premises and your virtual network through an IPsec side-to-side VPN connection. That means all the traffic will be going encrypted through the internet. Now, if you have a research facility, you have a research center, you can connect that using express route so that you have a private connection with your fiber optic cables, right? And then through peering, you can the all of the machines which are residing in these different subnets, these different virtual networks will be able to communicate with each other. Now, coming to routing. So as I give you a sneak peek about how routing can help you. So we have three kind of routes. The very first is system routes, second one is default, and third one is custom. So as I showed you a few moments ago, that the route that we just created is a custom route because we ourselves created it for our own unique needs. While if let me show you again the routes. Let me go to NIC, network interfaces, grab any of the NIC that you want, go to effective routes. So here you're gonna see all the route that is actually having. Route actually means passage or paths. So it is just like a Google map or you can say a map service, right? A map tells you that okay, if you wanted to go to this particular place, go through this and these roads, right? So the same happens with routes as well. So if a route tells it that okay, if you want to this particular address, then go to the VNet which is paired with you, right? Now if you want to go to any particular address, like maybe for example, if you want to go to this any address which is contained within this address prefix, like for example 10.2.1.0, which then go to the virtual network, right? So these are known as system routes. As you can see, the source is default, they were by default created. Now whenever I will create a new route, then will be known as custom route. And now there are some default routes as well. So a default means, so for this addresses 100.64.0, so these are a kind of private addresses. So if and the virtual machine tries to connect to that, it will be hopping to none. That means the packet will be dropped, it will not be delivered to anywhere. Now the use case of user defined route is, like I mentioned, if you want to filter the traffic, if you want to see that okay, whatever is going through from a virtual network, whether the traffic is genuine or not, then for this particular example you can attach a routing table to a particular subnet. Whenever a machine is trying to connect to this private subnet, you wanted to check that okay, if it is genuine traffic, whether it's having any, you can say a virus or not, something kind like something like that, then you can specify a firewall, and then you can make sure that okay, only genuine traffic is flowing through it, right? So I showed you that how can you add a route. Now let me show you that how can you associate that with a particular subnet. So again, let us go to route tables. So this is our particular route table. Go to subnet, click on associate, select the virtual network. Now only the routes and the router which are in the same region can be connected, because you see it is in India region, that is why it is only showing workload VNet. If I made a route in Japan region, then it will showing me the other virtual networks, right? So you can see okay, which subnet you want, click on OK, and then this route will be actually connected to my particular subnet. Now what is forced tunneling? So forced tunneling is a very, you can say, a great option given by Azure. So why forced tunneling means that you force a particular data, you force a particular kind of traffic to flow through some particular destination. Like for example, let me show you. Uh, Let me zoom the diagram. Okay, okay. Let me zoom out a little bit. Yeah. So forced tunneling is actually used for extra security. Like you don't want any hacker or employee to send important info or traffic to the internet. Then what you did is that through your virtual network. Where is the mouse? Huh. Through the virtual network, you make sure that instead of going this traffic to the internet, you make sure through a forced site-to-site VPN, it is firstly going into your on-premises, where you have some kind of firewall, where you have some kind of security checks, which makes sure that the traffic which is actually intended for going to the internet was genuine, was safe for your organization. And once you make sure, then only you allow that to pass to the internet. Or if someone from the internet wanted to connect to your backend services, your databases, which is having your critical customer information, then you denied that particular service. You make that to route through your on-premises or maybe any firewall, not on-premises, and then you check the traffic and then you allow the traffic to flow into. So this is the benefit of having forced tunneling. Now, I'm sorry because I don't have any firewall in place, so I will not be able to show you forced tunneling. But I can tell you at this point that forced tunneling is made possible through routes. So you can create a specific route that okay, if someone is going for internet which is 0.0.0, then the next hop type should be a firewall. The next hop type should be my on-premises. So by using routes, you can specify that. Now there is also a concept of a route server. Now a route server is fully managed. That means if you don't want it to always go ahead and specify that okay, what are the different kind of routes, what are the different machines that are being created, and you don't want to create a specific route table for all those different machines which are being created. So to make your task easy, you have Azure route servers, which enables network appliances to exchange route information with Azure virtual networks dynamically. That means you don't have to always go ahead and specify that okay, I created a new virtual machine, go ahead and attach the route table to that virtual machine. No, it will be automatically happening. And how this will be happening? It will be happening through Border Gateway Protocol or BGP. So whether you have your on-premises, you added a new device in your on-premises, you deleted any device on on-premises, the Azure virtual machines will be automatically knowing that okay, this new device was created, this particular device was deleted. Why? Because Border Gateway Protocol will be telling them through route server that okay, this and this is happening. As you can see that any VM which is connected to the Azure route server will be having in this example will be having these particular routes. Like if the traffic is intended for internet, firstly move it to firewall. Then any virtual machine want to connect to internet, firstly through the route server they will going to the firewall and then it will be moving to the internet. Now if the virtual machine wanted to connect to this particular address, then it will be forwarded to the virtual network itself. If they want to connect to this particular address which is my on-premises, then it will be connecting to that SD-WAN. So through route servers, I make sure I introduce a sort of automation, and through that automation, I make sure that okay, I'm able to do that, right? Now, if I go and show you that how can you create a route server, search for route server, go to route server, click on new route server, always choose the resource group, the name, region, I want Japan, this time. Then according to the region you choose, you'll be able to get to choose. Okay. So as you can see, the route server actually resides in a new subnet, in a particular server, because behind the scene the route server is nothing but various virtual machines being deployed. So for this, as you can see, it is asking us to create a new subnet with the name this and an address prefix slash 27, right? So let me go ahead and add a subnet. Okay, go to subnets, add subnet. Okay, what the name should be very specific. You can't give your own name, so that with this particular name, Azure will make sure that okay, this subnet was particularly created for route server, right? Go and type route server subnet, specify the address space, click on save. So as you can see, now it needs to have a public IP address. You can tag if you want to, or review and create. So once it's created, we'll explore some of the functionalities. But then, firstly, let us uh, talk about the various. How can we diagnose our routing problem? Now, Azure Portal is not all the only way to view effective routes. You can always view the PowerShell or CLI to use that. Now, if you ask me that how can I watch that, then you are always welcome to go to your uh, search engine using. You can search for that. Then you can search for okay, right? So with that you will get docs.microsoft.com option. Once you see that, you can use that particular command to view that, right? So this is the particular command. AZ network route table route create, or AZ network route table route list. So with this you can list the route in a particular route table, right? These are the particular commands. So I'm skipping this part now. Now always you can add custom routes to override default routes, and then make sure that you added the same route, correct route, right? Or you can also change or remove the undesired locations as you want, and always make sure that it is connected to a correct subnet. Oh, you don't want to get surprised that okay, it was actually connected to a very different subnet that I don't actually wanted, right? Now, now you can optionally, though recommended, that you can use a VPN gateway, network virtual appliance like a firewall or something, so that you can make sure the traffic data flowing in and out is going through some kind of security checks. It is going in an encrypted manner, or it is going through a reliable sources, right? Now, um, we already showed you the how can you create a custom route. Now let us come to network address translation on NAT devices. Now there are some kind of scenarios where you want your machines to be able to connect to the internet, but you don't want internet to be able to connect to your machines. Now if you ask me that what are you talking about? Why I want that to happen? Now one of this could be the use case could be like for any virtual machine which is having any critical data, and you don't want it to be able to communicate with the internet. Oops. You don't want internet to be able to reach that particular virtual machine. So you don't want that to happen. Let me do that. Wow. Let, so you don't want internet to be able to reach your virtual machine. But so like for example, if your virtual machine is running any containers in that, so for pulling or pushing into a container registry, you want to connect to the internet, right? So for those kind of scenarios, you can make sure and you can deploy a NAT gateway or network address translation gateway. So with the help of NAT gateway, you created a one-way connection to your internet, sorry, to your virtual machines. So with the use of a NAT gateway, your virtual machines, your any of the machines which is residing inside a virtual network subnet, inside a virtual network subnet will be only able to create a one-way connection to the internet, because NAT gateways are actually attached to a particular subnet. So with this one-way connection, you can make sure that okay, my virtual machine is able to get into internet, it is able to communicate, it is able to fetch the data, it is able to pull or push the Docker images and all that. But whenever a user from the internet tries to connect to your virtual machine, the access will be denied. So with for this kind of one-way connection, you can deploy a NAT gateway. Now, so firstly, let me choose and create a NAT gateway for you all so that you can understand the working of NAT gateway. So for this, let me firstly check that in which particular virtual network my Windows virtual machine is residing. WinVM, please give me a moment. Central India, workload minute. Okay. So while you are creating a subnet, or even if you have already created a subnet, in both kind of scenarios, you can always go to your virtual network, then you can go to subnet. So whenever you create a new virtual network, it will ask you to create a NAT gateway if you already have created a NAT gateway. So firstly, to come to this option, you have to firstly create a NAT gateway. So let me create a NAT gateway first. Always there's a cost associated with the NAT gateway. So we build on per hour basis on this NAT gateway. You can always go to the Azure pricing section. I don't want any demo. Give it a name. Make sure to choose the region in which your virtual network is. If you want it to be highly available, you don't want any kind of downtime for this, you can go ahead and choose any availability zone, or you can choose for none. You can also specify the ideal timeout. So with ideal timeout, it removes the it resets the TCP flow. That means if the traffic is not coming from 4 seconds, then it will close the connection. Now NAT gateway wants a public IP address. As you can see, I mentioned while I was talking about the public IP addresses that not all kind of SKUs are compatible with every with every Azure service. Like you can see, because it is a basic public IP address, it is not able to connect to the NAT gateway, which is of a standard IP address. So let me choose this one. Hopefully this is dynamic. You can always add a IP prefix. That means if you have 5 or 6 IP addresses, then you can always connect the IP prefix with a NAT gateway as well. You can associate the NAT gateway to any particular virtual network or a subnet. Then you can at last review and create. Now it will take some time to be created. As soon as it is created, we'll be um, so please give me a moment. It is creating. Okay, so the deployment was successful. Let me try to attach a NAT gateway in my WinVM subnet. As you can see, the NAT gateway that we created gets populated over here. Now I can click on save. Again, the basic SQIP problem. So let me attach a new IP address to my NAT gateway. Now sometimes the SQ creates a lot of problems. So you have to make sure that okay, which SQ you had and now to which XQ you are connecting to. Let me delete this one. Let me create a new IP address. Create a new public IP. Give it a name NAT IP. Hit on OK. OK. Save. It will take some time to attach this particular new IP address to my NAT gateway. So till then, let us explore some of the functionalities of an NAT gateway. So as I said that it will be providing a one-way connection and either one IP address or variety of IP addresses can be attached to a particular NAT gateway, and this NAT gateway is actually attached to a particular subnet, right? So with NAT gateway you create a one-way connection and it is fully managed. That means you don't have to worry about its whether it will have an impact on the bandwidth of your subnet, whether it will be impacting the performance of your virtual machines. No, because it is fully managed, and Microsoft will make sure that the traffic is going through it very nicely and in a speedy manner. Now, this is a particular example. So, for this particular subnet, you don't want the virtual machines maybe which is having a very critical resources inside them to able to communicate with internet. So for this you deploy the NAT gateway and attach the NAT gateway to this subnet. So whenever they are trying to communicate with internet, the traffic is firstly going to network address translation device or NAT gateway. Then it is performing SNAT or source network address translation. So what is happening is the packet which was having a source of IP of this virtual machine and a destination of internet, when it reaches NAT, NAT switches the source from its IP address, its public IP address, and the destination remains same. Now, after the data is coming back, it is actually intended for this NAT gateway. Now, NAT replaces its public IP address, makes it the private IP of VM, and then eventually the data is getting into VM. So the internet persons do not know that the original traffic is not coming from VM, not coming from NAT. It is actually coming from virtual machine. So it kind of hides that what is from which service behind you are getting the request, right? So an ad with a standard SKU can make you aware of that okay from which direction the flow was started. So if the flow was started from internet or the flow was started from virtual machine, right? So how to deploy a NAT? So I already showed you that how to deploy a NAT. So maybe from this time I able to associate my NAT with my subnet. Again failed. Can be deployed a subnet containing basic SKU IP address. Okay, because my subnet is having a basic SKU IP address, it is not able to deploy to that. Um, Sometimes it's really irritating, but it happens, right? So if I try to create a new subnet, the name NAT, choose my NAT gateway, click on save. So my subnet is created. Let me go to my Windows virtual machine and make it uh, make it connected to my just newly created subnet. Go to networking, NIC. Oh, sorry. Let me go to NIC, network interfaces. So what I'm doing is I am switching its subnet. So right now my virtual machine is connected to the Win subnet. I want it to connect to another subnet. Mm, Attached to WinVM. Where is that option? Sometimes you have the option in front of your eyes, but you are not able to see that. Though you have performed the task a variety of times, but it happens. Workload VNet, Win subnet. Okay, connected devices, WinVM. Mm, I'm not able to find the option of detaching the NIC card from this subnet to. Okay, actually I think I to remove that. Okay, so let me leave that. So I'm sorry I can't show you that. So we created a NAT gateway already. So thank you so much for joining.